In an earlier video on this channel, I did a speed paint of the new Corpsewrack Mausoleum terrain kit for Warhammer Age of Sigmar WarCry. And in order to make my new, well, I guess it's new for me anyway, my warband for Stormcast Eternals look like it goes with the terrain set, I wanted to create my own custom 3D printed bases. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield, and today let's take a look at using Blender 2.8 to create your own custom sculpted bases for your miniatures for games like WarCry. So very quickly before we get started, Blender is a very popular 3D animation, 3D modeling program. You can download it over at blender.org, and it does work great for 3D printing and all sorts of different types of 3D modeling. Now, it is a beast of a program, but I'm going to do my best here to walk you through the steps you need to take to create these bases. So alright, let's get started. And here we are inside Blender 2.8. If you're not really sure what's going on, you've never used this software before, you might want to check the show notes. I've got a link to a quick tips video where I go over the basics of the Blender 2.8 interface. Now, first things I want to do is actually jump into modeling mode. So in the top half of the screen here, click the little modeling tab. This kind of gets rid of some of the extra UI features that are more important for 3D animation, which aren't relevant for making our bases. Now, one thing it does do is it drops you into edit mode, so press tab on your keyboard to get out of that. And for the most part here, we're going to be working from a top-down orthographic view. So you want to hit 7 on your numpad, followed by 5, and you should see top orthographic up here in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Now, if you don't have a numpad, which are all the numbers on the right side of your keyboard, you want to check out a feature called Emulate Numpad. Just search for Blender 2.8 Emulate Numpad in the search engine. You get instructions how to enable that, and it lets you do some of these numpad features using the number keys above the letters. Normally we have to kill our starter cube here, but we're going to keep this around for now. But first thing we're going to add is what's effectively going to be a cookie cutter. So hold down Shift and A, and under Mesh we want to choose Cylinder, because what we're going to do is create a shape here that we're going to use later on to kind of trim down our base texture to make sure it fits on the actual base. As you can see, there's a little bit of an orange outline of a cylinder, but what we need to do is go down in the lower left hand corner and click on this little button that says Add Cylinder. This will bring up a lot more advanced options. Under vertices, we want to click here and crank this number up to 512, and then we'll adjust the radius here in a moment. Now, Blender in this mode does not create actual true circles. It approximates circles with a whole bunch of short little lines. So by saying 512 vertices, you use about 500 lines to approximate the shape of the circle, which once you 3D print it, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between this complex approximation and an actual real circle. Now for the radius, you have to think about what is the radius of your base. Now of course, radius is half the diameter. But with Games Workshop bases, they're tapered at the top compared to the bottom. So the top of the base is actually about 4 millimeters less than the actual width of the base. So I'm working on some bases here for Stormcast Eternals, which normally have a 40 millimeter base, which means the top actually has a diameter of 36 millimeters. Radius is half of that. So I'm going to punch in 18 for the radius. For the depth, oh boy, that just took a whole bunch of the screen. That's expected though. Because when you're 3D modeling for 3D printing, you're generally working with objects that are a lot larger than just normal 3D modeling, and that's why it's taking up the entire screen, but don't worry about that so much. For the depth, I want to crank this up to a huge number. I'll explain why later, but I'm going to make it 50. Alright. Actually, is 50 enough? 50 is plenty. So I'm using the mouse wheel to zoom out now, and what we're going to start doing is creating our cobblestone texture layout. So press Z, and this brings up an option of how you want to view the screen. We want to choose wireframe. And go back down here, and you can left click on the original starting cube. And now it is orange. What we want to do is we want to kind of make this approximately your, quote, standard brick, however you want to define that. So I'm going to press S and then X to kind of scale it along the X-axis here and make it a little bit wider. And then I'm going to do this, press S, then Y to make it a little bit wider in this direction. And I'm going to then just press S and make it a little bit bigger overall. And that right there, I think it looks pretty good for our kind of standard size block. Some are going to be bigger, some are going to be smaller, but that's a good starting point. So at this point here, I'm going to start beveling the edges. What I have to do first is something called apply scale. Now this is one of those behind the scenes mathematical things, don't worry about the details, but in order for the bevel operation to work correctly, we have to do this step. So hold down Control and then press A, it'll bring up the apply menu, and you want to choose apply scale. Now anytime you've scaled the object by using the S key like we just did a moment ago, before we go ahead and do any kind of other operations, you want to apply the scale. Alright, now we're going to press Tab to go into edit mode. And at this point I am going to use my middle mouse button to kind of rotate my view around a little bit. And let me actually do this just to get this block out of the way. Press Tab to go back into object mode, press G and then Z, and that's going to let us move the object up along the Z axis. And then, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. You want to press the delete key or the little dot key over in the numpad area, and that's going to let me kind of lock in to this object. So now I can use my middle mouse button to float around this object. Let's press Tab to go back into edit mode, left click somewhere that's not on the object, and you see everything turns gray. And now I need to start selecting the edges on the top and the sides. So in the upper left hand corner there's a few little buttons up here. We want to click this one right here that if you hover over, it's called Edge Select. So click that, hold down Shift, and I'm going to left select on the 4 edges that make up the top face right there. And then I'm going to select the 4 edges by Shift and left clicking on them, then make up the sides like that. Now I'm going to press Control B, and this is going to bring up the little like dotted line. Just immediately left click, and it's going to bring up the bevel options over here on the side. So for width, I'm going to just start increasing this a little bit, and you can kind of decide what looks good to you. Now keep in mind, if you're working with an FDM 3D printer, you can't really make details a whole lot smaller than your nozzle size. So I think what I'm going to do for the width, I'm just going to punch in, yeah, we'll do 0.5. So even though it says 0.5 meters, it's actually 0.5 millimeters. So 0.5, make it, let's see, what does 1 look like? That's too much. So let's go, yeah, let's go 0.5 here. And then for segments, I'm going to crank this up to about 6. We can do 5, make it a little bit small, a little bit less dense, 5. So that kind of approximate the look of like a rounded down cobblestone type object, right? So now press Tab and we're going to exit back out to object mode. Let's go back into top orthographic view, so 7, and you don't actually have to press 5 again because you're already in orthographic mode. And what we're going to do is now use this brick here as a template to make a grid so that it at least fills up this entire cylinder. So first things first, you can press G and you can see you can move the brick around. Let's place it down here. And what I'm going to do initially, what I'm going to do here is actually start with a process similar to what we did with the brick wall if you watched that particular tutorial. I'm going to use an array modifier to make a whole bunch of these. At the moment, I already have the modifier context selected over here on the right hand side, but if you don't, it's the tab with a little wrench looking thing. So let's go choose up the add modifier. I'm going to under generate, choose array. And then what I'm going to do is for count, let's make this be 20. Just give ourselves plenty of bricks to work with. And then under relative offset for X, let's make this 1.5. So you can see we've got a long chain of bricks just kind of spread out here. And then I want to hit apply. And now what I'm going to do is actually go back into edit mode. And so I'm going to hit tab. And now you can see they're all selected. I want to jump to vertex mode, which is up here, upper left hand corner, the button next to where you chose edge select. And then left click outside all the bricks, they're all going to turn gray. And what you're really just going to do is one brick at a time, you're going to click on one vertex. So one spot's going to change orange, do Control L for island select, and you're going to select that entire individual brick. Now let's press G, and you can kind of move it to approximately where you want it. You can press S to scale it up, choose like S and then either X to make it one direction, scale S and Y in the other, So you got a lot of different options as to what you can do. You can also then press R if you want to rotate a little bit to kind of make it look like it's a bit of out of place or something like that. So those are some of the operations you can play with. S for scale to change the size of the brick, G moves it around, and then R rotates it. And I'm just going to repeat that process with the rest of the bricks, or at least until I've filled up this entire area of the circle. Now you're going to be able to have things hanging outside the circle. That's perfectly fine. You just want to fill up the entire circle, but you do want to leave a little bit of space between the bricks to give that effect of, like I said, a cobblestone street. And let's go time-lapse mode. Okay, with that, I've got all my bricks laid out. I do have some extra ones over here, so I just need to delete all of these things. So I'm going to press B for box select, and just select all these guys, and hit X, and choose delete vertices, and they're all gone. Okay, now this is looking pretty good, except of course it's too big, right? So let's tab out of edit mode, and what I'm going to do is take my little texture here, and I'm going to reduce it by this cylinder, which I called a cookie cutter earlier. So I'm going to left click on the cylinder and select that, and I want to give it a name that's better than probably just cylinder. Actually, it's called cylinder. That's the default name Blender gives an object. So I want to click on the object context. It's on the left-hand side here, the little tab. That's a square with 4 little angle brackets around it. Highlight where it says cylinder, and let's change this guy to cookie cutter. And then we're going to left click back on our base, and I'm going to rename this guy to cobblestone. And now I'm going to use a Boolean operation to remove everything that's outside of the cookie cutter. But before that, I actually got to make sure that my base is within the cookie cutter area. So I pressed 1 on my numpad to get a front view like this, and you can see, well, the base is way outside the cookie cutter area. So I'm going to press G, then Z, and move it back down into the middle like that. And now as I rotate around, you can see, if I go to solid mode, press Z and choose solid, you can see that, well, it's inside the cookie cutter, which is a good thing for right now. So let's go back to our top view, go back to wireframe with the Z key, and then I want to return to the modifiers context, which is the wrench icon over here. And for add modifier this time, I want to choose Boolean. The operation is going to be intersect, and for the object, I want to choose cookie cutter. And what you can see right there, as long as nothing weird happened, it just cut down your texture to be the exact size of the base. So hit apply for the modifier right here under the name Boolean. And then I can take my cookie cutter right here. Let me do this. I am going to actually start to get ready to use this as the actual base. So if I press N on my keyboard here, it's going to bring up a whole bunch of stats on the right hand side. So what I'm going to do under dimensions here, I'm going to leave X and Y the same, and I'm going to set Z to 4 millimeters. So therefore your typical GW base is 4 millimeters tall. So we're going to actually have a base size that's the proper height, but then we're going to have a little bit of extra texture on top of it. All right. So you can see now the cylinder that was the cookie cutter, it's a heck of a lot shorter. I'm going to press G to Z, G and then Z, and then just move it down a little bit below my textured layer right here. Okay, so let's make the cobblestones look a little bit more beaten up. And if you haven't done so yet, because I haven't, you want to save your object. So hit Control S and go through the save prompts to save your file. And to make these things look a little bit more beat up, I'm going to do some basic sculpting in Blender. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's go up to Object Mode in the upper left-hand corner where you have a drop-down, and we want to choose Sculpt Mode. And what this effectively is, you can kind of imagine your little texture base here is now made out of clay, and you can kind of manipulate it as you would a clay structure. Add clay, remove clay, take stuff out, do weird carving, smash it up, whatever. But there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with sculpting mode, but all I'm going to work with today is going to be just the clay option here. And then I need to go find all the tools. So over here on the left or on the right hand side of the screen, if you see the little what looks to be a wrench and a screwdriver, not just the wrench, a wrench and a screwdriver. Click that, and these are all your options for sculpting. So all I'm really going to do is just kind of cut in the surface of the bricks. I'm not going to do a lot of fancy sculpting, just do really simple stuff. So over here in our tools, for strength, let's turn this up to 1, just like I said, simple things. For direction, we want to subtract. And the big thing though is down here you see something called Dino Topo or Dyne Topo. That's dynamic. Yeah, that's dynamic typography. That is called dynamic topography. Let's enable that. It's going to give you a warning. None of this matters to what we're doing right now, so just click OK. And then expand the options below. Let's choose detail size all the way down to 3. And now what I'm going to just do is I'm actually going to go to solid mode and then just start beating up my surface. You can see already I'm just left clicking and it's already kind of beating up the surface of the cobblestones. And just kind of run your mouse cursor across some of them. You don't need to do a lot of work. I mean, if you really want a pitted surface, you can. It's up to you. There isn't really a wrong way here. Like I said, you're just kind of giving the effect that your cobblestones are kind of beaten up a little bit. Round off some of the corners a little bit more. Oh, you know what I need to do? We need to turn off symmetry. So under the symmetry tab over here on the right hand side, we have the mirror option. Uncheck X. The symmetry modifier is actually really helpful if you're ever creating like something like an organic creature where you want to make the left side of the body be the same as the right. But for this kind of stuff where it's kind of random garbage, it doesn't actually help us at all. All right. There we go. So I've got a little bit of texture applied to all the cobblestones. That's good enough. Like I said, you can add as much or as little as you want. I'm going to return to object mode. So in the upper left hand corner under sculpt mode, click that drop down and jump back to object mode. Now, the last thing we need to do is turn this thing into an actual base. So click on our cookie cutter object down here, and I'm going to rename this guy 40 millimeter base. So 40 millimeter base like that. And what I'm actually going to do, let's go to our front view here. So press 1 on the numpad. Hold down Shift and D and then press Z. And this is going to let us duplicate a second copy of our base below. And this time though, with the new copy selected, under dimensions, we want to change X and Y to be 40. So this thing here represents the size and shape of the bottom of the base, and this guy right here is going to represent the actual base. Let's click on our actual base, tab to go into edit mode, press Z, and we want to jump to wireframe, left click outside the base to deselect everything, press B, hold down your left mouse button and select the bottom row of vertices, and then press numpad 7 to jump to the top, and you're going to hit scale. And what you want to do is drag your mouse cursor away from the object until the bottom row of vertices here is right around the same size as that duplicate object. So what that means now is the bottom row of the base is about 40 millimeters wide and the top row is about 36, which is pretty darn close to what an actual GW base should be. Now, one important note is that if you're a stickler for exact base accuracies, a 40 millimeter circle in Blender is not going to translate to exactly a 40 millimeter base on your 3D printer. That depends on their print nozzle and things like that. So you may have to kind of tweak this value a little bit if you're worried about getting exactly 40 millimeter base. If you're not too worried about it, what you're going to end up with is probably a base that's about 41 millimeters in diameter. It's not that big of a deal, but I'm sure some people would be a jerk about it. It's sad, and someone out there probably would be a real jerk about it. Okay. So let's jump back to our front view. Press tab to get out of object mode. And what we want to do with our base selected, press G and then Z. And let's drag it up. So you want to drag it up to at least until the bottom of all the cobblestone blocks are within the base. So you can see if I go in a little bit, zoom in. You can see here's the bottom of some of the cobblestone blocks, here's the bottom of some of the other ones. The exact position depends on how much scaling you apply to them. But in this case, all of them are kind of embedded within the base, with still a little bit of their size peeking out the top, which means you're going to be able to see a little bit of the texture between the blocks. So the lower you put the base, it means you're going to have more noticeable textures between the blocks, but the overall larger the base is going to be. It's a trade-off you like to go with. And then hold down Shift and select the cobblestone bricks themselves. We're going to hit Control J, and now we've got a single solid object base. So let's save that. To send this guy over to your slicer program, whatever that may be, just choose File, then Export, and you want STL. And the key thing here is under exporting STL, you want to choose selection only because you have your base selected. If you don't choose that, and in terms of all sorts of stuff, I mean, pretty much every other object in your scene gets exported at once, which you probably don't want. Maybe you do, but you probably don't. Give yourself a file name up here, hit export, and you can jump over to your slicer program, whatever that may be, and 3D print this guy up. I'm not going to go into the details of that process in this video because that really depends on what your 3D printer is. But I am going to show you, after you got this guy printed up, what you want to do to finish the base in preparation for attaching a miniature to it. So let's take a look at that right now. And just like magic, our bases are printed up because, you know, this is video editing, and I can do stuff like that. So at this point here, of course, with 3D print, you've got some uneven print lines, and some of the textures don't look so amazing because, you know, they're printed on stepped layers. So for these bases, the best thing you can do is just give them a nice, even coating of Mod Podge. I generally use hard coat for my 3D prints, but honestly, for the most part, it doesn't really matter. I've actually got a video on using Mod Podge Ultra, so you can check out that in the show notes if you want something that's a little bit faster in terms of just doing some spraying, but more layers. But either way, like I said, give it a nice coat of Mod Podge, let it dry for about a day, and these bases are ready to go. Once you prime them up, they'll look pretty darn good. Now, the caveat here with the Mod Podge is that you want to use an acrylic-based spray primer. Now, most miniature companies like Games Workshop, Citadel line of paints, the Army Painter, and so on, those are acrylic spray primers. But anything that uses enamels for paints may not be, and probably isn't. And if you don't use an acrylic-based spray primer on Mod Podge, it can cause some weird cracking and weird texturing, which honestly you may actually like. But if you just don't want to worry about that altogether, just like I said, use one of the major brands of Tabletop Gaming spray primer and it'll work fine. So just remember, super glue for attaching your miniatures to these bases. But with that, you're ready to go to prime your miniatures and start painting them up as normal. Once again, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. To get more tutorials like this, or if you want to see some cosplay things, just gonna hold that up right there. That video is gonna be coming out quite a while from now. You probably can't tell what it was in that short little preview, but someone might be able to figure it out. I got a whole detailed tutorial on whatever that costume thing is coming. Not for a few months though. It's probably gonna be later towards the end of the year. But for stuff like that, as well as robotic combat, and occasionally other things. Oh, there's robotic combat right behind me. Hit that subscribe button wherever it is on the screen, and also turn on that bell notification so I can annoy you for all the new videos I release, which are basically once a week right now. So thank you guys all for watching, and until next week, have a great week. And I said week like 4 times right in a row. Awesome.